Hello everybody and welcome back to another Iris tutorial video. My name is Alex and we're going to be covering something a little bit different in this session. We're actually going to start talking about the functional items within Iris. Now in this video there's going to be quite a bit of material to cover, so I might break this up into multiple videos, probably no more than 3, but I'll try to get through this as best as I can. Since we won't actually be looking at a lot of the function in real time, I won't actually be using this, I'm just going to be describing them. We should be able to get through this pretty quickly. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into AutoCAD. And as always, click Start Drawing to get to a new drawing. And one thing that I should probably point out to you, and I don't know if you've noticed this ever since I've been bringing up these windows, is that if you hit F2, the function key up at the top, you should see something that comes up that has all of these little Iris messages come up, and basically what that is it's just saying that Iris is loading onto your machine. If something like that is not coming up, just go down to the text bar down here down bottom, or the command bar, however you want to call it, and type in Iris, and it'll load everything up. Once it has the loaded T down at the bottom and it's not progressing any further, you're ready to move on. So before I get into the actual commands themselves, I did want to take a moment to mention that right now Iris is using just key commands in order to launch any kind of functions that we're using. The main reason why we're doing this is because Iris is still in its early infancy in terms of rollout, and we have multiple functions that actually do quite similar things. We're going back and doing some testing back and forth, and we'll actually require some testing from multiple users, not just me, in order to see which ones work better than others. So once those are all done and taken care of, we can pare the list down to the ones that we actually want to use permanently, and then we can create a button structure for those. So to bring up the commands that I was telling you about, we're going to type in IHK down into the command line down here at the bottom, and that stands for Iris Hotkey. So once you type that in, you'll come up with a nice little list of all the functions that are available to you within Iris. Since we're just going to go ahead and go through the descriptions real fast on these, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what these do. So the very first function that we have is IAT, and what it stands for is Iris Attributes. What this does is it allows you to take a block once it's inserted into the drawing and allows you to change the attributes. It's pretty similar to going over and changing the attributes in the properties window if you have one over here on the side. But if you like to have a clean setup and not have the properties over on the right hand side of your window, this is another way to do it. The next function is ICI, and this is one that we're going to be using a lot and probably pretty early on in the tutorials. What this stands for is Iris Custom Info, and if you're a designer that's been with us for a while, you're going to, once you bring this up, you're going to see that this is very similar to our project information window. This is where you'll put in all the information for a project, like your job code, the name of the venue, the name of the project, if there's a budget involved, account executive, and who it's drawn by. The next function on the list is ICL, which stands for Iris Clone. And what we use this one for a lot is to create new blocks. The nice part about this is that we'll be able to go in to something like, basically what will happen is you'll insert a block in that's pretty similar to what you have, and this will be nice if you're doing something to where you're creating new panels or new metal. You'll type in ICL and click on the block that you actually want to clone, and once you're into that, you're able to go in and change the name. You're able to change the attributes and the actual block record of itself, and then go back through it and redraw what you want it to look like. The next two functions that I'm going to talk about are going to be ICO, which stands for Iris Convert, and ICOA, which is Iris Convert Auto. Now, at the time these were being developed, these were supposed to be able to take exhibitware drawings and be able to convert them over to Iris's standards. However, there have been a lot of, I don't want to say issues because that's not the right word. The best way to explain is that it's a very complex procedure in order to do it. So we're going to basically leave these out here for now. We may do a tutorial on them later on, but we want to get you comfortable with Iris first and being able to build something before we go through and try to convert files over. The next one on the list is Iris Component, or ICOM. And what this is that this gives you a chance to modify the actual block record. So the best way to explain it is that if you have a block that you're putting into the drawing, and if you go in and change the attributes, you're only changing the instance that's in this drawing. However, if you want to go into a project, or excuse me, if you want to go into a block and you want to change what it is by default, we'll use ICOM. This is another function that we'll be using along with ICL in order to create a new block. Next one on the list is ICU, which stands for, again, Iris Custom Info. This is actually a duplicate of ICI, and because they're so close to each other in terms of performance and functionality, ICU is actually going to be going away. It's in here right now, but there's a really good chance by the time you start using Iris, it may not be in here anymore. So we're just going to go ahead and get past it. Next one on the list is IHI, which stands for Iris Handle Index. This is a key command that is strictly for the developer. If you click on an object and run this command, all it's going to do is just give you a bunch of coding, and it doesn't really do anything for us anyways. So although it doesn't do anything for us as users, it is being used for the developer. Again, like with ICU and some of these other duplicates that we're going to be seeing, there's a really good chance that it may not even make it to the list when you start to use Iris. Next on the list is IHK, which we actually already know about. This is Iris Hotkeys, and typing this in actually brings up this window. I can go a little bit more detail into this. Through IHK, you can actually double click on any of these functions in order to run it. Conversely, if you're pretty comfortable with Iris and have some of these commands memorized, you don't actually have to go into IHK every single time. You can just type in the regular command if you want. But for the meantime, I'll be doing a lot of these primarily through Iris Hotkeys so you can see where it's positioned on the window. The next one that we got here is IIN, which stands for Iris Insert. And we use this primarily to insert blocks and components. And what I mean by that is any of the parts that are in our library, most of them which are blocks right now, this is what we'll use to insert them. Later on down the road, we will start building assemblies, which is also mentioned here in the description. And an assembly is basically just a collection of blocks put together. We don't really have a lot of them right now, but we'll start adding those later on down the road. Next on the list is ILA, which stands for Iris Layers. Iris Layers is actually it's kind of like the second step of ISE, and we'll get to that here in a second. What it does is it allows you to be able to start off with a certain list of layers, and this was originally set up as an auto generation for all of our projects, primarily if you're going to be starting with a new project. However, after using it a couple times and messing around with some of the print settings for it, it didn't really make much sense to go ahead and use this as a function. So instead, we ended up just creating a bunch of DWT templates that are specific to each user based on what they like in terms of how many viewports they like, whether or not they like to use grid snapping or O-snaps. So we really won't be using this one very much. Maybe later on, but probably not right now. Next up, we got ILB, and this is probably my favorite function out of Iris so far. So if you're a designer that's been with us for a while and you're detailing your project out, you probably know how long it takes to actually go through and detail a project, especially a larger one. And it would consist of going through either memorizing or going back and checking all of the parts, creating a report, and copy and pasting text and creating errors in order to go ahead and label your label your parts. With Iris Label, you can actually click on the part itself and it'll self-label, which is pretty sweet. It's one of the reasons why I like it. These next couple ones here, ILL, Iris Layers Layout, ILM, Iris Layers Model, and ILOC, Iris Layers Create, are all tertiary versions of, let's see here, Iris Layers. So, as I mentioned before, with Iris Layers kind of being the secondary version of steps for Iris Setup, we really won't be using ILL. Whoops, let me get that back up here. we really won't be using ILL, ILM, or ILOC very much. Next we have ILU, which is Iris Label Update, and I don't really know how much we're going to be using this because ILU is kind of baked into ILB, and the reason for that is whenever you have to go in and change or update a drawing, whether it's in redesign or not, the iris labels that you create for all of your projects should self-update, which is really nice, especially if you're working on a larger project. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this in here for now. We'll gloss over it a little bit later on, but probably nowhere near as much as we'll actually be talking about ILB. Next one is IPO, which stands for Iris Plot. And what this was supposed to do was it was going to be an automatic plot function that took everything in your drawing and saved it out as a PDF. Well, it got to the point where we started putting our reports and our summary sheets into this drawing as well, and that's something we'll go over in a little bit here. And since we ended up doing that, it didn't really make much sense to use this. So as mentioned before with some of these other ones, there's a really good chance that IPL may not make it to the list when you start using Iris. Next up is ISD, which stands for Iris Settings Delete. Pretty similar to IHI. This is a developer tool only and really won't do anything if a user uses it, mainly because there's so many restrictions on what you can do with it. But because it's a developer tool and it was being used quite a bit, we're going to keep it in here for now just in case the developer does need to get in and make any changes. Next on the list is ISE, which stands for Iris Setup. And what this does is it allows you to create a new file based on any kind of project information you want to put in, as well as pick and choose any views that you want to put in for your paper space tabs. However, it did take quite a while for it to generate, and we did have some issues with it in terms of creating the right sized paper space layouts. Once we ended up testing with it for quite a while, it was kind of just deemed like unnecessary to have and took too long in order for it to really be useful. So instead what we did was we used it for a base to create all of our drawing templates, or the DWTs that we talked about in other videos, and I took those DWTs and made those specifically for you, depending on what kind of functions you like in your viewports and stuff. So now that you feel all special, let's move on to the next one. Next up on the list is ISS, which stands for Iris Schedule, and this is another one of my top functions that we use. If you're an order designer, you're probably very used to the process of extracting out a project, going through and creating reports individually, taking all those reports and putting them into the drawing individually in order to create a legend page, and basically use your best judgment on whether or not everything will fit. Iris Schedule does a lot of that for you, and the best part about it is that it gives you an option to run a send to shop list. Now keep in mind I said running the list, not running the function. And the reason why we brought that in is because there were some complaints that we had about people accidentally moving on to other projects without sending to shop. The problem with that is the next time that you run an export, or excuse me, the next time that you run an extract, it overwrites anything that you had that was going to go to send to shop. So this gives you one last chance to back out of the project, or I'm sorry, back out of the extract before you overwrite everything. Next we have ISC, which stands for Iris Schedule Clear, and this one is it's actually a secondary function of ISS. There will be times where you'll be working on a project and you may be kind of doing concepts as you're going along. So Iris Schedule is good for updating when it needs to, but if you need to clear absolutely everything out of a schedule, or excuse me, clear absolutely everything out of a drawing in order to start over, this is the best way to go. So say you have your schedules and everything in and ready to go, and turns out the client gives you, basically does a 180 on you and says start over. Just run ISC, it'll clear absolutely everything out, and then once you get everything redrawn, click ISS again and it'll run everything for you. Next up on the list we have ISM, which stands for Iris Slide Make. And what this does is we'll use this when we're creating blocks, and it'll create a slide that's generated, put along with the block and the block record information, and saves that image. So whenever we do an object insert or an iris insert, it'll give you a nice clear picture on what you're able to see. Now, Exhibitware was able to do something similar to that, but it didn't give you a really good option on what the views were. Basically, whatever your view was when you were building a block was what the little slide ended up being for it. We have this set up to where it goes to an isometric view, shows as much information as possible, and it's shown regardless on how you like to have your viewport set up, whether it's 2D wireframe, hidden, conceptual, or whatever. It always defaults to hidden, so it always gives you a really nice contrast without getting too much glare or losing too much detail on the sizes of block that you're making. Underneath ISM we have ISMR, and this was originally set up to be basically a test version of ISM. ISMR, or the other Iris Slide Maker, was meant to run as a function that would do multiple slides at one time. This is, again, more of a developer's tool than it is for the user, and for that reason we're going to go ahead and keep it on the list here for now, but we really won't be using it too much. After that we have ISV, which stands for Iris Slide Viewer. Now, Iris Slide Viewer is basically another developer tool, and it's a secondary function of ISMR. So ISMR, you'd be able to go through and run a list of like 250 parts. ISV would allow you to go through and look at 250 slides. Since we won't be using ISMR, we really won't be using ISV either. Next up on the list, and I'm going to try to do these both here at the same time, is IUP for Iris Update and IUPD for Iris Update Dialog. Now, as mentioned before with the Iris Convert function, we would run into situations where we needed to update our blocks. So if we wanted to do them one at a time, we would use Iris Update, and if we wanted to do everything at one time, we would do Iris Update Dialog. For a lot of reasons which I'm not going to go into, the simplest way to put it is that Iris doesn't read block definitions the same way as Exhibitware. We're not really going to be using this for much of anything. There are ways to take an Exhibitware drawing and convert it into an Iris drawing, but it's pretty lengthy, and there's a really good chance that errors will come up. The next two functions I'm going to talk about, mainly because they're very similar, are into and into. With into, this will allow you to go into a actual block file. So you won't be, if you type in into and click on a block, you won't be modifying the instance that's in your drawing. You'll be updating the block itself. And that's actually really nice if we want to ever change the materials, basically the default materials or attributes of a block. Into is basically the same thing. The only difference is that instead of using this for individual blocks or components, we would be using this for assemblies. Once we get into creating more and more assemblies, into is going to be a lot more helpful. Now the last ones down here, they're all directly related to each other, but I'm going to go ahead and break them up here real quick for you. VPFL stands for Viewport Freeze Layer, and this is kind of beneficial if you're in a paper space tab where you have a viewport that has a lot of things that are showing on it that you don't want. What it allows you to do is you can type in VPFL and then just click on objects throughout the model space in your paper space tab, and it'll just turn those layers off, which is kind of a nice function, but we really don't use it too much since we have the drawing templates set up the way we have them. The opposite of that is VP Layers Restore, and what this does is it takes all the layers that are frozen in a paper space tab, or excuse me, a viewport that's in a paper space tab, and brings everything back. So if you've turned off so many things that you can't remember what's been turned on and turned off, you can just hit VP Layer Restore and it turns everything right back on. The last one that we have here is VP Layers Save. And what this does is it's supposed to be able to take all the viewport layers that you've either frozen or unfrozen, basically make them viewable or unviewable, and saves them to a file that's pretty similar to your DWT. Well, we're actually not going to use this very much because this is another function that's closely related to ISE, the iris setup, which we don't use. So again, there's actually a really good chance that we're not going to be using this for anything. And that takes us pretty much to the bottom of the list. Now, I know that I've thrown a lot of information on you, and it's going to be kind of hard to digest basically just from being say, well, this is what it is and this is what it does. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude this video so we can get into the next video. And the next video is going to be showing you how to create an iris file from scratch. You'll be able to see a lot of these functions being used, and it'll give you a lot more insight on how to be able to use them for yourself. And as always, at the end of my videos, I always say that if you have any questions about anything, feel free to contact me either by phone or by email. Even if you have any suggestions on how I can make my videos a little bit better. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you very much, guys, for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.